Have you ever hit a financial milestone that you thought would change everything, only to realize a few months later that you still feel exactly the same way about money? Maybe you finally broke $50,000 in savings, or you landed that job paying $80,000 a year and you thought, this is it. This is when I stopped stressing about money. But then life happened, expenses crept up, and somehow you're still checking your bank account balance before making purchases and wondering if you can really afford that dinner out. Here's something that might completely change how you think about financial security. There's a specific number where everything shifts, where the constant low-level anxiety about money finally starts to fade, and that number is $100,000 in liquid savings. My name is Alicia, and I've spent years studying the psychology of money and why certain financial thresholds create dramatic changes in how people experience their daily lives. If you're working toward financial freedom, but you're not sure what that actually looks like in practical terms, or if you want to understand why $100,000 is the magic number that changes everything, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if this helps you out. Here's what most financial advice gets completely wrong. They treat money as this linear thing, where having $2,000 is twice as good as having $1,000, and having $10,000 is 10 times better. But that's not how money actually works in your life. Money has these threshold effects, these specific points where crossing from $99,999 to $100,000 creates a psychological and practical shift that's way more significant than the $1 difference would suggest. And $100,000 in liquid accessible savings is the threshold where you stop feeling broke even if you're not rich. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, great, another finance person telling me I need 6 figures in the bank, like that's easy, stick with me here, because understanding why $100,000 is the magic number will completely change how you think about building wealth. It's not just about having a big number in your account. It's about what that number does to your brain, your decision-making, and your entire relationship with money. Once you understand the mechanics of why $100,000 changes everything, you can start working toward it strategically instead of just hoping you'll somehow accumulate money by accident. Let's start with the most obvious reason why $100,000 feels different. It's the first time most people have what actually qualifies as a real emergency fund. Not the baby emergency fund that personal finance gurus tell you to start with. Not the 3 months of expenses that sounds good in theory but barely covers rent if something actually goes wrong. I'm talking about a legitimate buffer that can handle multiple emergencies happening at the same time without destroying your financial life. Think about what most people consider an emergency fund. They've got maybe $5,000 to $10,000 sitting in a savings account, and they feel pretty good about themselves for having it. Then their car needs a $3,000 repair. Okay, that's what the emergency fund is for, right? Except now they're down to $2,000 to $7,000, and they're frantically trying to rebuild it. But before they can get back to where they were, their laptop dies. That's another $1,500. Now they're really stressed because their emergency fund is basically gone, and they're one more surprise expense away from having to put things on a credit card. This is the treadmill that keeps people feeling broke even when they're technically being responsible with money. They build up a small emergency fund, something happens, they drain it, they rebuild it, something else happens, and they never get ahead of the curve. It's like trying to bail water out of a leaking boat. You're working constantly, but you never actually fix the underlying problem. But when you have $100,000 sitting there, the entire dynamic changes. Your car needs $3,000 in repairs? Annoying, but not catastrophic. Your laptop dies? Frustrating, but whatever. You can handle both of these things and still have $95,500 left. You're not back to zero, stressed about rebuilding. You're still in a strong position. Here's what's really interesting about this psychological shift. It's not just about the math. Obviously, $100,000 can cover more expenses than $10,000. That's basic arithmetic. What changes is how you feel about money on a day-to-day basis. When you have a small emergency fund, every unexpected expense feels like a crisis because it's taking a significant chunk of your safety net. You're constantly in this state of low-level financial anxiety, always bracing for the next thing that might go wrong. But when you have $100,000, individual expenses start to feel like rounding errors. The $3,000 car repair is 3% of your savings, not 30% or 60%. Your brain stops treating every financial surprise as an emergency This brings us to the second major shift that happens at $100,000. You stop making decisions based on fear. Think about how most people handle their finances when they're living paycheck to paycheck or operating with minimal savings. Every decision is driven by anxiety and scarcity. Should I take this job that pays more but requires relocating? Too risky? What if it doesn't work out and I can't find something else? Should I negotiate harder for a raise? Better not push it. I can't afford to lose this job. Should I start that side business I've been thinking about? Absolutely not. I need every dollar from my stable paycheck. Fear-based financial decision-making keeps people trapped in situations that limit their earning potential and career growth. They can't take calculated risks because they don't have the cushion to absorb a potential failure. They can't walk away from toxic work environments because they need that paycheck too desperately. They can't invest time in developing new skills or exploring new opportunities because they're too busy grinding to cover their current expenses. But when you have $100,000 in the bank, you have options. Real options. Not just theoretical possibilities that sound good but feel impossibly risky. Suddenly, that job opportunity that requires relocating becomes something you can actually consider. If it doesn't work out, you have enough runway to find something else without immediately panicking about rent. That negotiation for a raise becomes less terrifying because you know that even in the worst-case scenario where they let you go, you've got months to find a new position. That side business idea becomes something you can actually test without betting your entire financial stability on it. This is what financial advisors mean when they talk about money buying freedom, but they usually explain it in these vague, abstract terms. The concrete reality is that $100,000 gives you enough breathing room to make decisions based on what's actually good for your long-term success, rather than what feels safest in the moment. Let's talk about something that nobody really discusses openly: the mental energy that financial stress consumes. When you're broke or barely scraping by, a huge portion of your cognitive resources is dedicated to financial anxiety. You're constantly running calculations in your head. Can I afford this? If I buy this, what will I have to skip later? How many days until payday? What's my account balance right now? Is that charge going to overdraft me? This constant mental overhead is exhausting, and it affects everything else in your life. There's actual research on this called the scarcity mindset, and it shows that financial stress literally reduces your effective IQ. When your brain is constantly worried about money, you have less mental capacity available for everything else. You make worse decisions at work. You're less creative. You're more irritable with the people around you. You miss opportunities because you're too mentally drained to notice them. It's like trying to run your computer with 50 programs open in the background. Everything runs slower and nothing works as well as it should. But here's what happens when you hit $100,000 in savings. All that background mental noise starts to quiet down. You're not constantly checking your account balance before making purchases. You're not running mental calculations about whether you can afford groceries this week. You're not lying awake at night wondering what would happen if your car broke down. Your brain gets to focus on things that actually move your life forward instead of constantly managing financial anxiety. This cognitive freedom is worth way more than the actual dollar amount sitting in your account. Now let's address something that might be making you uncomfortable. The idea that you need $100,000 in savings probably sounds completely impossible if you're currently struggling to save even $10,000. You're thinking about all the expenses you have, all the debt you're carrying, all the reasons why getting to $100,000 would take decades at your current rate. And honestly, if you keep doing what you're currently doing, you might be right. But here's the thing about reaching $100,000 that's different from smaller savings goals. The path to get there forces you to fundamentally change how you handle money. You can't accidentally save $100,000. You can't get there by just being slightly more careful with your spending or cutting out lattes or whatever basic advice the internet loves to repeat. Getting to $100,000 requires you to become a different kind of person financially. You have to learn to live below your means consistently over a long period. You have to develop the discipline to not touch your savings even when you really want something. You have to get serious about increasing your income because cutting expenses alone probably won't get you there fast enough. And the beautiful thing is that all of these changes you make to reach $100,000 are the same changes that will help you build even more wealth once you get there. Think about someone who manages to save their first $10,000. That's actually a huge accomplishment, and they should feel proud of it. But the skills required to save $10,000 are pretty basic. They had to spend less than they earned for a while. They had to resist some temptations. They had to be patient. Those are all good things, but they're not transformative. Now think about someone who builds up $100,000 in savings. That person has had to develop serious financial discipline. They've had to say no to lifestyle inflation probably hundreds of times. They've had to make strategic career moves to increase their income. They've had to stick with their plan through market downturns, through their friends buying houses and taking expensive vacations, through all the pressure to spend money they don't have on things they don't need. The person with $100,000 in savings isn't just wealthier than the person with $10,000. They're a fundamentally different kind of person when it comes to financial decision-making. And that difference is why they're unlikely to ever feel broke again, even if they spend some of that money or face financial setbacks. They've internalized the habits and mindsets that create financial security. Here's another shift that happens at $100,000. You start to understand the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Most people think these are the same thing, but they're completely different. Being rich is about income, about how much money flows through your hands. Being wealthy is about assets, about how much you've kept. You can be rich and broke if you spend everything you earn. You can be wealthy on a modest income if you consistently save and invest. When you have $100,000 in the bank, you've crossed over from just earning money to actually building wealth, and that mental shift changes everything. People who are just rich, who have high incomes but no real savings, are still operating in a scarcity mindset even if they don't realize it. They might be spending thousands of dollars on luxury items and experiences, but they're still living paycheck to paycheck, just at a higher dollar amount. They're still one job loss away from financial catastrophe. They still can't afford to take risks or make moves that might benefit them long-term but cost them short-term. But people who are wealthy, who have built up real assets even if their income is more modest, have fundamentally different options available to them. They can take a lower-paying job if it offers better work-life balance. They can pursue passion projects that might not be immediately profitable. They can invest in opportunities that might take years to pay off. This is why you'll often see people who make $200,000 a year feeling more financially stressed than people who make $70,000 a year but have $100,000 saved. The high earner is trapped in a lifestyle that requires every dollar they bring in. The modest earner with savings has flexibility and security that the high earner can't buy. And once you understand this distinction, you stop chasing income for its own sake and start focusing on actually building wealth. Let's talk about something practical that changes dramatically once you hit $100,000, your investment strategy and risk tolerance. When you're working with small amounts of money, investing feels risky and scary. If you've got $5,000 and you put it in the stock market, a 10% drop means you just lost $500. That feels significant and painful. You might panic and sell, locking in your losses. You might be so afraid of losing money that you keep everything in a savings account earning basically nothing. But when you have $100,000 and you're investing it properly, the psychology shifts completely. Yes, a 10% market drop means you just lost $10,000 on paper, which sounds way worse than $500. But here's what's different. You know you have enough cushion that this temporary loss doesn't threaten your financial security. You can ride out the volatility because you're not desperately needed that money next month. You can think long-term instead of panicking about short-term fluctuations. And this ability to stay calm during market volatility is what separates investors who build real wealth from people who buy high and sell low and never get ahead. Plus, when you're investing $100,000, you're finally working with amounts where compound growth starts to feel real and meaningful. 10% annual returns on $5,000 is $500. That's nice, but it's not life-changing. 10% annual returns on $100,000 is $10,000. That's real money. That's the equivalent of a part-time job that you're earning while doing absolutely nothing. And when you start seeing your money generate thousands of dollars in returns, investing stops feeling like this abstract thing you should probably do and starts feeling like an actual wealth-building machine. Here's something most people don't realize until they experience it. $100,000 is the point where your money starts working as hard as you do. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're the only engine powering your financial life. Every dollar you have came from you trading your time and effort for money. But when you have $100,000 invested and it's generating returns, you've now got a second engine running. Your money is making money. And while $10,000 a year in investment returns might not replace your salary, it's covering significant expenses without you having to work for it. This is the beginning of the compounding effect that wealthy people always talk about, but that seems theoretical when you're starting with small amounts. When you earn $10,000 from your investments and you reinvest it, next year you're earning returns on $110,000 instead of $100,000. The year after that, it's $121,000 if you keep reinvesting. Your wealth starts to snowball, growing faster and faster without requiring proportionally more effort from you. And once you experience this firsthand, your entire perspective on work and money shifts. You start thinking about how to accelerate this process rather than just grinding away at your job forever. Now let's address the psychological aspect that nobody talks about, what $100,000 does to your relationship with other people. Money affects every relationship in your life, whether you want to admit it or not. When you're broke, you're constantly in this position of financial stress that affects how you interact with everyone around you. You can't help friends who are struggling because you're barely keeping your own head above water. You feel guilty when family members help you out financially. You're resentful when friends suggest expensive activities you can't afford. But when you have $100,000 saved, these relationship dynamics completely change. You can help people without it threatening your own stability. If your friend needs to borrow $1,000, you can actually consider it without panicking about your own bills. If your parents need help with something, you have the resources to contribute. This doesn't mean you become everyone's ATM, but it means you have the option to be generous when it matters. And this ability to help others without sacrificing your own security is incredibly freeing. There's also something powerful that happens in your romantic relationships when you have real financial security. Money is one of the top causes of relationship stress and divorce. When you're financially stable, you remove one of the major sources of conflict that destroys relationships. You and your partner can have conversations about the future that aren't dominated by anxiety about paying bills. You can make joint decisions about careers, family, and lifestyle based on what you actually want rather than what you can barely afford. This doesn't mean money solves all relationship problems, but it definitely eliminates one of the big ones. Here's the final piece that makes $100,000 transformative. It's enough to fundamentally change your relationship with work. When you have no savings, work is this thing you have to do because the alternative is homelessness and starvation. You take jobs you hate, you put up with terrible bosses, you sacrifice your health and relationships because you literally cannot afford to do anything else. But $100,000 buys you something invaluable, the ability to walk away. This doesn't mean you quit your job and live off your savings until it runs out. That would be idiotic. What it means is that you're no longer making decisions from a position of desperation. If your boss is abusive, you can start looking for another job without the terror of missing even a single paycheck. If your company asks you to do something unethical, you can refuse without immediately worrying about how you'll pay rent. If you want to negotiate for better pay or conditions, you can do it from a position of strength because you're not negotiating from fear. This shift in power dynamic affects everything about how you approach your career. You can take your time finding the right opportunity instead of jumping at the first offer. You can invest in developing new skills that might take months or years to pay off. You can consider relocating for a better opportunity without being terrified about the transition period. You can think strategically about your long-term career path instead of just trying to survive month to month. And ironically, this ability to think long-term and take strategic risks usually leads to earning more money, which makes building wealth even faster. So here's the reality check. Most people will never reach $100,000 in savings. They'll spend their entire lives earning decent money, maybe even six-figure incomes, and they'll die with minimal assets and maximum regrets about where all that money went. They'll read something like this, nod along, maybe even feel motivated for a day or two, and then go right back to their old habits. They'll buy things they don't need to impress people they don't like. They'll finance lifestyles they can't afford. They'll make excuses about why saving is impossible while simultaneously spending hundreds of dollars on things they'll forget about next month. But if you're one of the few people who actually takes this seriously, who commits to reaching $100,000 in savings no matter how long it takes or what you have to sacrifice to get there, your entire life is about to change. Not just your bank account, but your stress levels, your relationships, your career options, your ability to sleep at night without financial anxiety keeping you awake. $100,000 is the threshold where you stop feeling broke and start feeling like you have actual control over your financial future. The path there isn't complicated, though it is hard. Spend less than you earn. Save the difference automatically before you can spend it. Invest it consistently in boring index funds. Increase your income through strategic career moves. Avoid lifestyle inflation like it's a disease, because it is. Repeat this process for years without getting distracted by shiny objects or peer pressure to spend money you don't have. Eventually, you'll wake up one day and realize you have $100,000, and nothing about money will ever feel the same way again. The choice is yours. Start building toward $100,000, or spend the rest of your life wondering where your money went.